What do we want? Change. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Change. When do we want it? Now. This chant, or some variation of it, has been a constant in almost every social justice rally or protest I have ever attended. Often the specific change activists are pressing for at that particular protest is named in the chant. Let's try it with an eye toward the climate crisis. I'll say, what do we want? And you say climate action. I'll say, when do we want it? And you say now. Let's try it. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
Envision elegant white flowering plants called bear grass. Waterfalls splashing down rock walls into crystalline blue-green pools, cloud formations shifting over mountain vistas. These were among the sights I saw last June when my family camped and hiked at Glacier National Park in Montana. It was wet and unusually cold even for Montana at that time of year. The Going to the Sun road through the high mountain pass didn't open until the very end of that week in June, giving us access to more miraculous waterfalls, weeping walls, and snowfields where children played and squealed with joy. As we enjoyed the beauty of this piece of earth, I might well have forgotten about climate change. But occasional signage about the steady disappearance of the park's namesake glaciers reminded visitors that humans have been turning up the heat on the planet for centuries now. It was a jarring experience to walk among silvery tree trunks, inhaling fresh mountain air and admiring the many wildflowers and water features, feeling truly interconnected to all of life, only to be reminded with sorrow and alarm of the unfolding climate catastrophe. This information was just as surely a sign of our interconnection as the beauty around me, for it affirmed that the influence between humans and our habitat goes in both directions. The network of mutuality across the planet is truly reciprocal. The stark fact is that 3/4 of the glaciers at the park have already been lost since 1850. Based on global climate change trends, researchers predict the remaining glaciers will be gone by 2030. The cost is far greater than a loss of beauty. Climate change is wreaking havoc on so many lives. It's causing death, disease, and displacement for millions of people. And it's driving other creatures to extinction. Scientists tell us we are in the beginnings of the 6th great extinction event of the last billion years on Earth. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
I can identify with activist Derek Jensen. In an article called Beyond Hope in Orion magazine, Jensen wrote, "Frankly, I don't have much hope, but I think that's a good thing. Hope is what keeps us chained to the system, the conglomerate of people and ideas and ideals that is causing the destruction of the earth." Now, we aren't usually encouraged to think of hope as a problem. Most people I know strive to hold on to hope. So what is this hope that keeps us chained to the system? With conversation partners, Jensen came to understand hope to function this way. Hope, he says, is a longing for a future condition over which you have no agency. It means you are essentially powerless. Jensen goes on, when you quit relying on this kind of hope and instead begin to protect the people, things, and places you love, you become very dangerous indeed to those in power. So hope can stall action. The loss of hope can open the way to discovering our real capacity to create change. Now, I'll tell you that I usually find myself more drawn to what Gandhi called constructive program, creating new institutions and ways of life, rather than what might be called obstructive program or protest. Both are important, disrupting business as usual and creating other ways. But today, with the climate crisis, I sure don't feel like I can opt out of protest. Because it's going to take a lot of experimentation over time to change the ways of life that created this climate tragedy, which has been centuries in the making. And we will face far worse conditions and have less time to adapt if we don't turn up the heat on leaders now and force real action through some obstruction. That's what the global climate strike next Friday is all about. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
Recently, I pulled out of my closet a handful of protest posters I have made since I moved to Fort Worth to serve this congregation a few years ago. Our present age has prompted me already into protest mode far more often than I would like to be. Let's take a look. So this is the first of several that I took to the first Women's March in Fort Worth in January 2017. It says, "The children are watching," and shows several children of varying ethnic backgrounds. They are watching. The children right here in this church, and the children all over the nation and the world. Sometimes it seems the children are more ready to face the realities of climate change than we grown-ups are. In fact, the children are not just watching, they are leading. As we heard in the Time for All Ages, Greta Thunberg of Sweden started the school strike movement, which has become a global movement of young people and those following them. Skipping school to protest may seem extreme, but I don't think one can argue with the logic of the climate strikes. By allowing the climate catastrophe to develop and threaten young people's futures, throwing the relevance of their education into question, adults have broken the social contract. So young people are not bound to that social contract either. And it's working. These young activists are getting the attention of world leaders in a way that decades of adult environmental activists have failed to do. Now 16 years old, Greta sailed from Sweden to New York this week to address the United Nations. She told world leaders at an earlier event, "Our house is on fire. We are facing a disaster of unspoken sufferings for enormous amounts of people. And now is not the time for speaking politely or focusing on what we can or cannot say. Now is the time to speak clearly. You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie, a very dangerous lie. Either we prevent 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming or we don't. Either we avoid setting off that irreversible chain reaction beyond human control, or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization, or we don't. That is as black or white as it gets. There are no gray areas when it comes to survival. Adults keep saying, we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope, Greta says. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act like your house is on fire, because it is. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
People across our region are participating in the global climate strike this Friday, including right here in Fort Worth. Organizers describe the event this way. On September 20th, hundreds of thousands of people across the U.S. and the world are heading out to the streets to demand that world leaders, our government, and the fossil fuel industry change course immediately to avoid a climate catastrophe. Scientists agree that we have about 10 years to save our communities, future generations, and the planet from extreme natural disasters. So strike with us on September 20th like your future depends on it, because it does. Unitarian Universalist youth are among those leading this action. 3 UU young people presented at a recent webinar I attended for church leaders promoting the strike. From left to right, 16-year-old Sophia Geiger is a national organizer for Fridays for the Future, one of 6 youth-led organizations creating the climate strike. Levi Draheim, age 12, is a plaintiff in a legal action launched in 2015 against the U.S. government over climate change. This was by Our Children's Trust and Earth Guardians. And Charlotte Stewart Tully is a leader in School Strike for the Climate Tallahassee and a fellow at the organization Our Climate. She's 16. They are active in their UU congregations in Silver Springs, Maryland, Brevard, Florida, and Tallahassee, Florida. Levi, by the way, the kid in the middle there, had some challenges getting on the call because his part of Florida had been hit by the latest climate change-driven hurricane. I was inspired by the clarity and the drive of these young leaders. But they stressed not to expect their generation to fix these huge problems created by many preceding generations. That's overwhelming and not fair. And they don't want the adults who witness their work to simply take passive hope. They want us to take action. Here's how Sophia put it. To change everything, we need everyone. Strike on the 20th. Take action in our own cities. Keep taking action until we are not ignored anymore. A year ago, I never thought of myself in this position. But in just a month, she says, I have seen the impact of organizing. It's about the number of people all around the world together. If you could bring a friend, that would be awesome. If you could bring 5 friends, that would be amazing. So young people are asking us all to show up. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
Here's another poster from my protest collection. Those of you who are fellow Star Trek fans will get the play on words. It says, resistance is fertile. And that's true. It's not futile. The climate crisis is not a Borg takeover. Resistance is fertile. It's full of fertile possibilities for a better future. Rebecca Solnit said, inside the word emergency is emerge. From an emergency, new things come forth. The old certainties are crumbling fast, but danger and possibilities are sisters. We have to act now to leverage the possibilities in this dangerous time. Those possibilities lie dormant like seeds until we act and bring forth something green and new. And resistance matters not just in the grand scheme of things, but in the most personal, immediate way. Resistance will give you back some of your life that is being quietly sapped by the knowledge you carry somewhere in your heart or body about the climate crisis. I understand how hard it can be not to fall into unremitting despair or numb paralysis if you are able to push past flat-out denial. But nothing cures fear like action. Nothing cures the loneliness of despair like gathering with other people who share the same concerns and commitments. So if you are suffering climate grief or despondency, if you are feeling sucked dry of energy, one of the very best things you can do for yourself is join others who care and take action. It will get you back in touch with your own power and with the web of life. Resistance can also help get others engaged and lead to changes on all levels. Grown-ups, I invite you to think about going and striking with a child or a youth in your life if you can. Bring your friends. You will all benefit in spirit. And more people will put more pressure on the power brokers to act. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
Here's my last poster, originally created for the Women's March. It says, "We can only be great together." It shows multiple arms and hands of different shades, grasping each other and grasping an upstretched fist of solidarity from which bursts a flame of fire, a flame of knowledge and power. The award-winning image incorporated there, which was created by someone else in a poster contest, is a repudiation of the divisive attitudes and backwards policies that separate humans into different groups and elevate some groups over others. It says no to the hostility we have seen from leaders of our country toward immigrants and people of color and toward marginalized people in general. The truth is, we can only be great together, and all justice issues are interconnected. Sophia Geiger explains it this way. People facing climate catastrophe disproportionately are people who didn't cause it, and marginalized communities. Striking is a way to say, we are not okay with what's happening. We will not let marginalized people be swept away while politicians and fossil fuel companies continue business as usual. There's lots of work to do in terms of equity and justice, and we can't do that work on a dead planet. Charlotte Tilly Stewart explained that among the demands of climate strike organizers, the biggest demand is science-based, equitable policy. Not just science-based policy, those facts Greta was talking about, but also equitable policy, fair to everyone. The demands have been developed by several communities, climate activists, migrants, racial justice organizers, and others. So this is intersectional justice. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
Okay, I have two more posters to show you. My daughter and I made these in anticipation of marching in a climate march in Dallas a couple of years ago in the spring. She said it was okay to share this picture of her with you. The sign she is holding, I don't know how well you can see it, says, "Stop spoiling my planet, stop spoiling my future," with a stop sign. I struggle with a lot of decisions these days because of the knowledge of climate change. I'm not certain what the world will look like 10 years from now, much less what will happen over the full arc of my child's life. I fret over what to do with retirement investments, given how economic growth is at the root of the problem, and given how climate crises will destabilize markets. In moments of panic, I wonder whether I should get us closer to the family farmland in Iowa, where we could potentially live off the grid, using the most vital of all resources, land, to grow our own food, if it came to that. I've been stalling making a decision about what to do when my 2004 Honda Civic hybrid car goes kaput. Should I look at an electric car and get totally off of gas? Could I afford it? Is there any way my family that lives in the suburbs could stop being a two-car family? Should we move closer to where we go to school and work? And then there's longer distance travel. When, if ever, is it conscionable to fly? Is it a good idea to purchase carbon offsets or a naive cop-out? Oh, and should I shape my child's expectations to include a college education? Will a degree be relevant enough in whatever the future economy is to justify the debt? I don't know. I struggle with a lot of decisions, but not the global climate strike on September 20th. When I first heard about this action and discovered that we had one in Fort Worth, I immediately decided I would go. I'll admit it didn't occur to me initially that my child might go on a school day. And then I learned that this strike was an outgrowth of the school strike movement started by Greta Thunberg. And I thought, who better to go than our children? So that is one decision I do not struggle with. If my child wants to strike for the climate, we will go together. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
Here's the last poster. It plays on the lyrics of Bob Marley's One Love song. It says, "One love, one life, let's get together and save our home." If you've been coming here for a while, you may remember me talking about other things courageous people have done to force attention to climate change. I have admired the valve turners, people willing to shut off an oil pipeline, most likely resulting in arrest and serious jail time. Many of those moved to do that have been retired people, grandparents. Most are white people who recognize that they can take such an action with less risk than a person of color. I'm not sure I would take that risk myself as someone with a child at home. But you know what? I sure can show up for this climate strike on Friday. In fact, it seems like the least I can do. So count me in. The children of the Earth Tribe and all our other relations in the web of life are asking us if it's at all possible for us to show up. So if that's something you could do, I sure hope you will show up and be counted on Friday too. What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Climate action.
When do we want it?
Now.
As we face an uncertain future, may we help to bring forward some of the better possibilities of tomorrow through our action today. So may it be. Amen.